Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Sarah Klopatek currently serves as the Director of Sustainability Research and Development and lead scientist at JBS USA. Specifically, Sarah works on livestock sustainability research, net zero initiatives, and animal welfare. Prior to working at JBS, Sarah was a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of California, Davis, working in a beef cattle system dynamic and livestock sustainability. During her graduate career, Sarah completed numerous beef cattle research projects, including a sustainability assessment of 4 grass-fed and grain-fed beef systems, multiple beef cattle life cycle assessments, a national beef sustainability and BQA survey, and multiple meat science projects. In addition, Sarah was heavily involved in teaching and outreach. Over the course of Sarah's graduate and postdoctoral career, Sarah earned numerous awards and fellowships, including the National Cattlemen's Foundation Farr Scholarship, the Council of Agriculture and Science Technology Fellowship, the James Beard Fellowship, and the American Society of Animal Scientists Young Scholar Award. Dr. Sarah Klopatek, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It is so great to host you. I'm so glad that I found your work. I'm glad that we were able to connect and do a discovery call and talk all about your work, which I find absolutely fascinating. And I think this is such an important message. Before we were airing this conversation, you and I were kind of talking about not a lot of people know the information about how we get our beef. We're so disconnected from our food. And it's interesting that a personal trainer and nutrition coach is sitting here talking to somebody like you who deals with beef livestock. And in a normal world, I don't think that would happen. But when we started to transition over to low carbohydrate and more carnivore style diets, we noticed that people like really cared. You would think that this would just be a group of savages that are just trying to kill as many animals as possible. And that is absolutely not the case. These people care more about their food and where their food comes from than hardly any other group that I've ever met. I just think it's so fascinating that our two worlds are converging today.
I know, but you said normal, but what is normal? And besides, normal's never any fun. So,
That is very true. And that is a great segue to my first question about you. When did you discover that you didn't exactly have what we would call a normal childhood?
Oh God, we're gonna hit that, right? That's a great question. And it's my greatest strength and greatest weakness. I feel that sometimes is I did not actually grow up on a cattle ranch as much as I would have loved that. I grew up with two research scientists as parents. They were ecologists. So I grew up on controlled burn sites, and my mom actually in utero. My mom was 8 months pregnant, and she was doing controlled burns. And there's pictures of her doing fires and whatnot, and they were measuring, soil organic carbon and microbiome. Microbiota, and they were looking at all these systems below and above ground. And so I came out in a world and asking, why does this happen? Why did this happen? And, sustainability with me started early on, but it wasn't the S word back then. It was just ecology and what's happening. And so I had a really cool upbringing, but I was, like so many consumers out there, I didn't know where beef came from. I didn't know where food really came from as far as how the system worked. And then I remember reading a book that was required reading for our AP English course, and it was Fast Food Nations. It was also another book called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, that basically his book is why we have an FDA. So as you can tell, that book was pretty extreme. And then the other book, Fast Food Nations, was detailing all the problems with the American food system, and it really hit on beef. And so I said, oh, okay, well, what is this? And that's how I got into agriculture. And what I learned is books are really important, but what's more important is you need to get boots on the ground and you need to see how it works. And it's only then that you can really understand the system. And that's only you need to be able to work with ranchers, understand the plight of ranchers and farmers, and just what they're doing day to day to really be in that nexus of sustainability.
Yeah, so I've never read those books, and I know that they exist, and I know there's others that are similar to it. Was there any particular like bias that you noticed in the book, or any like particular reason why they were saying the thing? I think most of what they were writing was actually probably correct, and there were problems in the industry, but they were really myopic about it. Do I understand that correctly?
I think we like to have blinders on, and a lot of times we like to point out problems without ever having solutions. You know, like this is wrong or this is bad. It's like that's not really necessarily true, or it's not actually helpful. In the space that I work in, and I'm working it when I was working in grass-fed and grain-fed systems, the goal was never to say, hey, you're right, you're wrong. It was like, let's just evaluate the systems and let's see the trade-offs between these different systems, because our producers, you know, want to know, hey, can I economically have grass-fed beef on my operation? What does this mean? You know, what does it mean for the environment? And then our consumers are like, okay, what does this mean for my health? What does this mean for the environment? Is it worth the extra buck or two? You know, so I want to go into it from that and a holistic approach and answer our producer and our consumer questions.
Yeah. Well, you and I also were talking offline about a mutual friend, Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, which we were able to talk to last week. Actually, I drove up to his facility, and you really got a sense of like, this is a very nice state of the art type of facility that is in the dirt. And like you walk out the building and literally there's fields and cattle everywhere up there. And that's where
Mhm.
the research is done. It's partially done in the lab and it's partially done on the ground. You mentioned boots on the ground. Tell us about your experience of boots on the ground. I understand that your college experience wasn't like a normal doctor, you quote unquote doctor's experience.
I would call it being spoiled rotten, because in the back of my rig I had barbed wire, I had fence cutters, you know, I had feed, I had so much in the back at all times, bandages, anything for what was going to happen, because my I was, you always say, you know, cradle to grave, and I was with them. My cattle, I had 68 head of cattle to take care of over a 2-year period. So I was there on the day they were AI'd, which means they were artificially inseminated. So I was there and helping with that process to when they were calved out, and then I was responsible for their upbringing and their feed, their animal welfare, everything. So I had that experience of and some of the challenges that I had a purview into what our ranchers are facing. Some of these challenges, I literally lost land during the project. It was bought up, our lease was bought up, and it was converted to orchards. So it was, you know, really great land for cattle that was over for a crop. That is a huge problem facing a lot of our ranchers in the West. And then I also had an issue, it was no fault of anyone's. We have a pink eye problem out in California. It's carried by the flies, and every year the strain changes, and it didn't matter if they're grain fed, grass fed, or whatnot, they the pink eye came. So just some of the health challenges and things that you can do everything right and still it's Murphy's Law when it comes to cattle. So
Wow.
I had some really, really unique experiences, and it was really an excellent time to do research. It was before COVID, and it just gave me a lot of hands-on experience that I couldn't have gotten in any other way.
That's amazing. And that's when you fell in love with cattle in particular. At that point in your career, did
Oh
you
no,
not
I
like
had fallen
fully
in love
decide
with
you did?
cattle during my undergrad. So I mean, I was in love with cattle. I was in love with cattle when I was 5, because we had cattle next to our house, and I would make my dad take the grass clippings over to the cows, and we would drop off the grass clippings because I wanted to feed the cows. So no, actually, I would say it's been forever.
It's been forever.
It has been forever.
When you weren't like grabbing at rattlesnakes and scorpions all over the place in the desert and like hanging out with your parents, which were doing all that burn research. Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so when you got to do some of this research, it sounds like you didn't really have a bias in either direction. It sounds like you were approaching this just as an observer and as a scientist. Would you say that's true?
I'd say that's absolutely true, because the science was, you know, there wasn't really definitive science. And also I had never seen a research project that kind of did the full gauntlet that said, okay, here's your water, here's your global warming potential, which are greenhouse gases, here's your land space, all of these questions. But what does that mean to the rancher? Like, how much does it cost to do these systems? But what does it mean for human health? What does it mean for meat quality, like their quality grade and the yield and just animal performance in general? And so I was able to go into this project answering with the goal of answering all of these questions. And there had never been a study yet that had done that. They would maybe be just like comparing one grass system and one grain system and answering one question. I did 4 different systems and answered a bajillion questions.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And when we talk about like the vegan argument, I think Jane Reese Buxton does this very well in her book, The Great Plant-Based Con. She kind of separates the arguments out into 3 kind of distinctive things to basically talk about. The first would be human health. Is this the best thing we could eat to maximize human health? I think that's a big one. The second one would be ethics. Are we ethically doing the very best thing for ourselves and for the animals that are sentient beings as well? And the third argument would be more like planetary health. What is the best thing that we could all be doing for planetary health? And I think we're going to live more in that third bucket today, although we will have lots of crossover into the other ones. But maybe we could just start out this discussion by saying, so you're talking about the numbers. Everybody knows the numbers. They've heard it on Cowspiracy or whatever documentary, and they think that cows are responsible for 51% of greenhouse gases, and there's thousands of gallons that goes into making a pound of beef. Can you address some of the numbers that we hear and what is actually the case and what's actually going on?
Of course, and you do hear a variety of numbers. So hopefully I can kind of put these into a picture that's easy to digest. Hold on. Sorry, she's having a sneeze fit on my lap.
I love cats.
Literally, she won't stop sneezing, and I can't.
That's hilarious.
Okay, well.
That's hilarious.
Okay, sorry. She's looking at me like, okay,
What?
let's go again.
Cool.
So the first number that you may hear is, we weren't done. Now we're done. I'm gonna ignore her this time. Okay, so the first number we typically hear is, we'll hear 18% of global greenhouse gases are attributed to livestock. That number is from an older report from the FAO. And unfortunately, that was an inaccurate number. When they did the report, they didn't do an apples to apples comparison when they did livestock and transportation. That error was identified and then it was corrected in their most recent report. I believe it was in 2013. The number is now 14.5% of all global greenhouse gas emissions are coming from livestock. Now, in the United States, this is going to be a very different number. Remember, think about how the United States is run versus South America, Africa, all these different areas. We're going to have more industrialization. We're going to have more cars on the road. So our footprint for livestock is going to be very different than comparing the global number. So when you hear the United States number, what you're typically going to hear is 4 to 5% of all US emissions are coming from livestock. Now, why does beef and dairy get a bad rep? Why are cows getting antagonized? The main reason is because of their methane production. And methane is a greenhouse gas. It's a short-term climate pollutant, as we call it, but it has a global warming potential 30 times higher than that of carbon. So basically, it's like 30 carbon is the equivalent of 1 methane molecule as far as its heat trapping capacity. And so because it's higher, it's a more potent greenhouse gas and there's more concern. Now, cattle are ruminants, and so they have evolved within their giant chamber in here. It's like beer fermentation. It's a giant fermentation vat up in front of their intestines, and it's huge. And it has evolved to eat forages, and its byproduct, its waste product is methane. And so that's why they're able to eat this grass in such an efficient way. And just to put a note, it's not just cows. Cows are ruminants, sheep are ruminants, elk, deer, those are all ruminants, and they are also producing methane in the same or very similar manner as cattle are producing methane. But that is why they have a negative stimulus as far as when you see, they say don't eat beef, it's bad for the environment, is principally for the methane. The other issue that people are often talking about is cattle land space. But this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. You know, the grasslands in the United States are rapidly being converted, either for crops or for urban development. And having cattle in these open contiguous land spaces can actually be incredibly beneficial from not only a carbon perspective, but from a biodiversity water perspective as well. And so having these large spaces and having cattle in these spaces can have a benefit. And it's unfortunate sometimes that benefit is overlooked, and sometimes they'll just be like, oh, they have a massive land space. And it's like, but what land is that space? And that's really important, because, you know, when I was raising my cattle, I was on native grasses. And, you know, a lot of the work was trying to say, okay, how can we put more perennial grasses in the system? How can we make the ecology better in this area? How can cattle be part of this solution? And that's what we were, you know, always looking at and always looking to improve. And if we just remove the cattle, you remove the ruminant from that system, you may not be able to achieve the goals, or you might just have your native lands with the native wildland species be taken off and put crops or put other systems or put houses. So not all land space is created equal. So that's really important to point out. But
yeah,
those are where the numbers are coming from. And whenever you hear a 50% number, question it. It might just be 50% of methane, not 50% of all greenhouse gases. So always be saying, hey, where'd you get that source? Where is that from?
Yeah, this is why we love talking to scientists, because you keep that top of mind. Always question for sure. And I took a picture and posted on social media. I'm sure I got blasted for it. I can't remember some of the comments, but near me is a little, you know, there's a pasture, there's cows on it. Behind the pasture, there is a 6-lane highway in both directions and a cement factory that's like decimating a mountain as they're harvesting all the sand for concrete production. It's like, is it these guys really? Do you think it's these guys, or is it maybe like a ton of traffic and all of these practices that we have? Like it's all
You want
apart.
a concrete number? Not
Yeah,
to be punny, but literally the number for concrete around the world. I apologize, guys. You can tell I'm a scientist. The humor is awful. It's Big Bang Theory.
It's so good. I love it.
So concrete actually is responsible. The production of concrete is responsible for 8% of global greenhouse gases.
Wow.
So just,
there you go.
I know, but in like, yes, cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens are part of that 14.5%, but 100% of people have to eat. So
yeah, that's right. That's a really good point. And this is where there's so much nuance to this.
right.
Hearing you and what you're saying is like, yeah, the cows are producing methane, but they're also making manure and putting that manure back on the land, which then has the power to sequester carbon. You talk all the time, which I love, about trade-offs. What's the trade-off there? Is it a 1-to-1? Is it equal? What do you think about that?
I think there's a lot of trade-offs in you know, when looking at economics, when looking at sustainability, when looking at land spaces, water. One of the biggest ones I found in my studies is not all grass-fed systems are going to be the same. Not all cattle production systems are going to be the same. And in the West, despite the most recent news, the West is in a serious drought despite all the rain and the floods. But a great deal of cattle operations, not all of course, but many of the cattle operations, especially for the grass-fed systems, need to rely on irrigation at one point or another. Now, if you have irrigation, that means you have really nice, strong, nutritious crops that are and forages that are fed to the cattle. The better energy, protein content of those forages, the better the animal's going to do, right? It's going to perform better, it's going to gain weight better, which means it's a more efficient system, which means your carbon footprint goes down. But again, you needed to have enough water to do that. So there can be like a carbon water interface at times, so where you could get a lower carbon footprint, but you get a higher water footprint. Or you can have a lower carbon footprint, or a higher carbon footprint, but then a lower water footprint. And it's like, what is your goal? And what it really shows is there are no silver bullets. And when you're going to research, you have to be looking at the whole system rather than just the blinders is not going to get us to the solutions. We need to be able to take a step back in either nutrition or animal production or sustainability in general. You have to look at the whole system, because then you can get better answers, and those trade-offs tell you a lot about where the science needs to go and how you approach things, from a consumer basis, but also from a policy basis, and how sometimes, just having policy that does this, that doesn't address the nuance, and the nuance is the truth. And so it doesn't address the truth. And so
that's such a good point, and that's why I get frustrated when people throw around global numbers. You can't even look at, like you said, like our country's huge with all kinds of different ecosystems, water systems. It's very different everywhere, and the way you're explaining it, it couldn't even be like a regional thing. Like two ranchers in the same valley who are neighbors might have completely different goals and different finances and different water access. There's so much nuance to it that it would really have to be individual conversations with ranchers. Is that correct?
Yeah, because one rancher, so say rancher A, he doesn't have access to irrigated pasture. His stocking numbers might be different. Rancher B might have additional pasture in another state, and he moves his cows so he can, stock more heavily. You could have a rancher that is in, southern United States, southeast. They get a lot of rain, and you can just, you can have that. I don't know if you've heard of, it's called short durational paddock grazing. It's where you're going in quickly and going through. Well, that could be a great system there that can work if you have, the manpower to do that, and the soil is prepared and all the things are working. Like, it can be excellent, but you can't transcribe one thing and put it over there. And it's just, you really have to work on what is the rancher's ability, what's his goals, his labor, her labor, what is her whatever she has. It's going to be different, and I think we just like to simplify things, and it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. People want simplicity, I believe, because it gives them some sense of control. And the thing is, with food systems, and particularly beef systems, they're some of the most complicated systems in food that there is. And so you're really never going to get true simplicity, but you can get more holistic science that can address some of these tough questions.
Yeah, I can see your true scientist side could just be absolutely fascinated for the rest of your life on this topic, because it is so complex. There's so many questions to answer. It's amazing. Okay, so water is another good one. You hear that, like, it takes tremendous resources, not only for the cows to drink, but also for the plants to grow that then feed the animals. None of this ever really made a lot of sense to me, but it's a number that you hear thrown around a lot. So does raising beef require massive amounts of water resource?
Yeah, I always see the one, it's like 50 bathtubs. Have you seen? I don't know. It's so I was interested in the water number. So I did a postdoc. So what a postdoc is, so after you get your PhD, you're like, I still need to nerd out a little bit more. So you still work with a professor, and your job is 100% research. You're now a staff member at that point. You're no longer a student. And I knew after looking at all the USDA records, talking to all the scientists, that we know that the beef cattle system has gotten more efficient. And if it's gotten more efficient, we also know per kilogram or per pound of beef, the carbon footprint has gone down. But what I wanted to understand was, well, how did the water footprint change? And especially being in the West and growing up in Arizona, my concerns are going to be water, because like we're literally, getting news reports saying we're running out of water. There's towns in Arizona with no water. And beef can be targeted with those huge bathtub water numbers. Well, first off, let me dispel some of the water numbers. Water is categorized. It's categorized into blue, green, and gray generally. Those are the three big categories. So blue water is drinkable water, basically. It's the water that is in our aquifers, so our groundwater, and it's the water in our streams, so surface water. And then there's green water, which is the water, it's like basically rainwater, but also the water that comes off of the plants for respiration. So that is your green water. And your gray water is basically, we'll call that more of recycled water. So, when you see the water being pumped up at a lot of the parks, they're like, please don't eat the fish here. A lot of times that's, municipal recycled water. So beef cow, when you see those water footprints, those include rainwater. And that's why they're so high, because all the water that falls on the rangelands is accounted in that analysis. It's not wrong, but it's misleading. 4% of that is rainwater, or excuse me, 4% of that is blue water, which is the water in our streams and our groundwater. And so that's the number we have control over. As much as we like to have control over green water and to do some rain dances, I think they did a pretty good rain dance in California recently.
Yeah, seriously.
but we don't have control over that. So when looking at that 4% of blue water number, what I looked at was over the last 30 years, our beef production system has changed. How did it affect the water inputs for a pound of beef? And what we found is that per pound of beef over the last 30 years, the water intensity went down 38%, which is huge. And then when you look at it from a whole US beef cattle herd perspective, water total use went down 29%. So per pound of beef, it went down 38%. For the US cow herd, it went down 29% within a 30-year period. And I just think that's huge. It's a massive change.
Wow.
So understanding, it's like, okay, all right, Sarah, you said it changed, but why? Why did this change? Like what?
Yep.
What magic? Sometimes you might say, well, did the cows drink less? No. Cows did not drink less. They actually drank more. So let me explain. So about 30 years ago, we were producing a lot less beef per animal than we are today. And so because of that, we've enabled our cow herd, our number of cows have gone down, but the amount of beef produced per animal has gone up. So our total beef production has gone down. So because of the change in our system, more beef, fewer cows, that impacted the water footprint. Now, the next thing that really made a difference is what animals are eating. Okay. So we have something called byproducts and co-products. It's like, wait, what nonsense are you feeding? What does this mean? Cows are amazing. Remember that really cool rumen I was telling you about? I know everyone gets mad about the methane, but that rumen is awesome, and it can eat things that we cannot eat. We as in pigs, as in humans, as in so many species in general, cannot utilize ingredients nearly as well as cattle. So we can feed co-products like beet pulp. We can feed bakery waste, which is the waste products coming down from bakers. Other things can include like straw and all these kind of products that cotton byproducts, tomato byproducts. All of these things are coming into the feed system, and we weren't readily feeding it. 30 years ago. And now cattle, their diets are 10 to 40% in the feedlot are 10 to 40% co-products and byproducts. And that includes co-products coming from the ethanol industry, so distillers grains. So cattle are pretty awesome, and they're able to, what a lot of times people like to say is upcycle. You're taking a nutrient that otherwise could not be utilized, and you're turning it into high quality protein.
Yeah.
And so because of that, the water footprint has gone down because cows need to eat, right? But instead they're eating basically something that would end up in a landfill, rather than growing additional crops. So that was what also really went into that decrease in water footprint, and just overall efficiency of the system. Genetics are better, nutrition is better, management is better. So it's just really cool to see that maybe like the average consumer isn't going to be out there in a feedlot or on a ranch and seeing like these little changes that are happening. But the fact is they are happening, and the beef industry continues to get more and more efficient. And it's not at a cost, to animal welfare or greenhouse gases. In fact, it's improving. So I think that's what's really cool is to see how this whole system is growing and moving up in unison to be more efficient, more sustainable.
That is absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate you explain that. It solves so many issues from the food waste side of things. Like that's a big problem. People throw away a lot of food, and if we can run that through an animal that can use it, can ferment it, and all of a sudden is giving us high quality protein and fats that are absorbable by humans, like what an amazing system. So it's so cool that they're finding the solutions like that. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So now grass-fed versus grain-fed. You have done a lot of research on this topic, and I think it is endlessly fascinating as well. I think even I would go as far, even as somebody like who wants to be more plant-based, at this point in today's day and age, I think they could probably get on board with the idea that if we do cattle raising regeneratively in a regenerative way, then that's a good thing, and they can at least be on board with it, whether or not they decide to eat the cow or not. But there's a lot to this story. It's not just that like people raising grass-fed grass-finished beef are the saviors of the planet, and people that use feedlots are destroying the planet. It's not that simple. So can we maybe get into kind of the difference between the research that you've done on the difference between grain-fed and grass-fed?
Yeah, and it is a Pandora's box, right? And it's really heated and emotional. And I'll just say, when people are like, well, what do you eat? I eat what's on sale at the grocery store. I just got out of grad school, so you know. So first off, it's important to note that all cattle spend the majority of their life on grass. So regenerative ag can happen in any system, if in any cow-calf operation. It's not exclusive to grass or grain. Now, understanding what is and what isn't possible and how do we define sustainability, what I really like to discuss is sustainability of scale, which is like, wait, now what's she talking about? So sustainability of scale is just that. What scale are you talking about? Are you talking about individual rancher A, or are you talking about the United States? What scale are you talking about? So if you're talking about, let's say, a grass-fed producer who has a great soil management plan, a great animal health program, he has an ability to sell his meat at a price that can keep him in business. And that's something extremely important. If the rancher cannot afford to do it, it is not sustainable because he can't do it, then there's no food. This is really important. And as consumers like the product, then you have a system that could be considered sustainable, right? Now, could you then apply that system, that grass-fed system, to the entire United States? The answer is no. Even there were some Harvard studies that were done, and they said there's literally not the land space to do 100% grass-fed in the United States. There are restrictions to where the beef production would be extremely limited. And then the other issues are like, okay, then what would you do with all of those products that would then go to the landfill that are, now being fed to animal in the feedlot? So you would have these trade-offs. You would have less meat production. You would have severe economic issues. Byproduct allocation would not be available anymore at the same scale. So it's not possible to do grass-fed for the entire United States, but that doesn't mean grass-fed cannot be a part of the system. And the way why I have that approach of, is grass-fed or grain-fed better? I don't have that. One has to be a certain way. It's because I believe that diversity is the key to resilience, and resilience is the key to sustainability. And having both grass-fed and grain-feds and varieties of the system is what leads to that diversity, and that's what leads to that sustainability. So I think all systems are a part of the program.
Yeah, very well explained. I asked a question similar to somebody in the carnivore community a few months ago. Her name's Laura Spath, and I asked her the question, like, does the meat quality really matter? Should we all be buying grass-fed, grass-finished beef, or is store-bought beef just as good? Is it okay? Is it passable? And I loved her answer where she said, like, look, I'm in Arizona. The meat that I get from my store is local to me. I don't know if it was raised here. There's not a ton of beef around her where she is. Wherever it came from was local to her. And that's the way she thinks about it. Like, our United States has a really good system of raising beef in particular, and we move it around a little bit in different stores. And like, when you go into the store to one of my favorite sections, which is the meat sale part of where the meat is sold, I feel good about buying that, because that could be food that would be otherwise wasted, and I know that's going to be good nutrition for me. At the same time, I also love buying a quarter cow from a local rancher in Nevada, and I love and appreciate both of those things, and it sounds like that's kind of what you've learned as well.
Yeah, I really have. There is, and I think it's really important to have consumer choice. Like, that is what our country has been built on, is choice and allowing consumers to choose. It's just, what is my job is to help give consumers the correct facts so they can make the choice. A lot of times, sometimes, a consumer would say, well, I know that will have a lower global warming potential, or less greenhouse gases are produced in grass-fed. And I can say, well, that's not what our results have found. In a lot of cases, because grass-fed, it takes longer time to finish. Remember that methane I was saying, when they were eating that yummy grass, but then the methane was coming out? Well, it takes them longer to get to a certain weight when they're on grass versus on grain. And so they're producing more methane, and they're producing it for over a longer period of time. So in most cases that I have seen, the grass-fed carbon footprint maybe is higher than grain-fed per pound of beef.
Wow.
But it might have a lower water footprint or higher water footprint, but in most cases, because you're not running a feed mill, you can have a lower energy footprint. So it's just and it's like, I have family they can buy, like, and it's like, that's fantastic. I would love to get on that, but at the same time, I'm going to go over to my local grocery store and get whatever's available, because I work in the food chain, and I know what's going on. I see how food is being processed from the cow-calf ranch to the packing house. I've been in feedlots all over the world, actually, and I have confidence in how that production system works and how they treat their animals. And so yeah, I'm also going to be regularly buying my beef at the grocery store with confidence, because I know how that system works.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that insight. You've already shared several major trade-offs that you've learned through your research. Are there any other really interesting trade-offs that most people probably would not even be considering?
Nutrition.
There you go. Great.
So a great one, and what I always was interested on, it's like every celebrity, like before the vegan, a lot of the interest in vegan and plant-based, a lot of it was grass-fed is better, or there'll be Twitter people that are personalities that are posting like, I'm a nutrition expert, have grass-fed, not grain-fed, it's better for you. But I would say, but why? But pork, why is this? And they would say, well, it's higher in omega-3s. I'm like, what else? So I went and I looked at those 4 grass-fed studies. I'll just tell you what grass-fed I was looking at. I fed animals on 100% grass for 25 months. Another treatment was 20 months grass-fed. And then the typical age of harvest with grain-fed for 150 days in the feedlot was 18 months. But I also looked at a 4th treatment that's very popular in the farmers markets. We grass-fed them for 20 months, and then we grain finished for 45 days. So that's becoming a very popular, more niche market, farmers market that producers are doing. And what we saw is that grass-fed for 20 months, but then grain finished for 45 days had a very similar nutrition profile to an animal that was grass-fed for 25 months. And so it still maintained a great deal of the omega-3s. And actually the omega-3 and omega-6 ratio was still very preferable between those 2 treatments. Yes, grass-fed generally is going to have higher omega-3s. However, that is one of many fatty acids. And in addition, we generally do not consume beef in the United States simply for its omega-3s. We're lucky that we have options to have things like salmon, which are going to be much higher in omega-3s. But in more developing nations, they might be landlocked and have access to fish, and actually omega-3s are very important from their lamb and their goat and their beef. But so from a nutritional perspective, yes, omega-3s are good, they're important, obviously, but in addition, MUFAs, which are monounsaturated fatty acids, which the FDA has recently reported that they are a healthy fatty acid. They're important for heart health. Those are much higher in grain-fed systems. So although omega-3s are higher in grass-fed systems, the MUFAs, monounsaturated fatty acids, are higher than grain-fed. So you have like a trade-off, a nutritional trade-off. And so what's really difficult to actually definitively say, one is better than the other. It's like, well, one is better in one thing and one is better than the other. So if you're basing your purchasing decisions from a human health perspective, know that there's going to be trade-offs. The other thing to keep in note is that you're going to have more variability in your grass-fed systems compared to your conventional systems. The diet is more regulated, and so you might have a grass-fed animal that's really, really, really marbled. So their fatty acid profile is going to be much different than some of the conventional grass-fed that you're going to get in the grocery store. That's much, much, much leaner. So
wow,
it just depends
trade-offs.
where you're getting things from.
Trade-offs again. Yeah, that's so important. I'm so glad you explained that. I do want to go back to that type of a feeding system. It occurs to me that doing, the grass for 20 months and then finishing for 45 days on grain, for what reason are they doing that? Is it specifically for nutrition? Is it for increasing the efficiency, or is it even just as simple as something like taste?
It's all of them. So animals are able to gain more weight and to marble better, and when they're on that diet, so it provides a nicer eating quality. So a lot of producers are doing that because it had to do with economics, animal performance, and then consumer preference. So there's the idea that they're on grass for an extended period of time, so the consumers, they prefer. A lot of the consumers prefer that, but then they want to maintain a high quality, taste. And a lot of consumers, they do not like the taste of grass-fed. Some love it. It just depends. But by being that grain, it changes the tenderness, how the meat tastes, the juiciness. And then what was just really interesting is that you can do that short grain finishing, but you can still maintain the high quality, nutritional profile of that 25 month. So while still having the MUFAs being added from the grain. So it was a really interesting system that's like, ooh, well, this is cool. So
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you for explaining that. I'm very fortunate that I found this rancher that I said I bought the quarter cow from. His his meat tastes phenomenal, and it's grass fed, grass finished, everything. The cows never even leave the property. It tastes amazing, and that's the first experience I've ever had with grass fed, grass finished, where I didn't think the taste was terrible, and that was prohibitive of me eating any meat. And so it was either grain finished meat or no meat. And so there, again, there's a lot of nuance there, and a lot of people don't appreciate the taste. I want to just reiterate something you said earlier. I'm so excited to ask you about this. You said that you have spent lots of time on lots of different feedlots, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There is this idea that grass fed, grass finished on the ethical side of things is like this is the best life for a cow. And from what I've seen, it looks pretty amazing. Like the rancher guy described it as cow heaven. They love it. They eat all kinds of different, grasses and vegetation. And, the kids get to play with the cows all the time and like have cool interactions. It looks really amazing. And then you have this idea of a feedlot is like a prison. It's ultra stressful. The cows hate it. People reference the feedlot in California by the freeway that they say it smells
Oh
terrible.
yeah,
Like
off of
clearly,
I-5. Yep.
clearly this is the worst thing ever. It's cruel. It's awful. It's stressful. It ruins the environment. What have you learned about life or about feedlots themselves as part of that system?
Those animals are monitored 24/7. I can tell you that. I will speak to my own experiences because I had animals in the feedlot and I had animals on grass. I was when I first tweeted my paper. I was brand new to Twitter. I still am pretty new to Twitter, and I posted the paper in excitement. And someone that was a vegetarian or vegan, she was very angry, and I didn't talk about animal welfare. Even though I was like, okay. And I told her we maintain the best animal welfare for all of our facilities. But ironically, the only quote uh, animal health issue besides the pink eye was from my grass-fed systems. I had two boys that got in a fight, and I literally had to separate them like kindergartners. I went out there and had to build fence and do a buddy system so that I can keep them apart for a while. Because I got hit, he was fine, but he
Wow.
was limped a little. And I just thought that was so ironic that the only issue I had was from my boys being butt heads and fighting each other. But it was funny when I had them out on range, my grass-fed animals, I did my best to check on them, but I couldn't, it was an hour away. I couldn't be there every day. There was someone that was living on the facility that can check, but they're out and about and they're doing their own thing. So, but when I had my animals in the feed yard, I was there every morning and every night checking on them. When I showed up, they would come running versus my grass-fed animals ran the other direction.
Wow.
Because they're like, oh no, don't bother with us. But my feline animals knew I was going to feed, and so they got super excited. You had to be careful with your hair and your hand because they would be licking you, and then
Wow.
yeah. So I can just speak that I mean I was really excited. My animals did really well as far as gaining weight. I didn't even have one stuffy nose. I was really lucky, but it's like they were. It's hard to say. Were you happy? I don't know what metric that's a new emerging field to understand animal welfare, but I can say that when I have a cow run up and lick me, I kind of feel like I feel good. And
Yeah.
so I ensured that their welfare was top notch. And I can say that the feeders that I talked to and I've worked with, like that is their number one concern. They're involved with the beef quality assurance. They're involved with all the universities to learn about this. It's an emerging field, and just to maintain the highest animal welfare standard possible. And because that's what everyone really does care about, and it's not, what is that called when I mean everyone cares. Like I
Yeah.
think what's not understood is that people are getting up at 3 in the morning in blizzards to pull a calf.
Yeah.
People are getting up at 3 in the morning and mucking out feed bunks from the snow, or it is their entire lives. And when that is so much part of your life, of course you're going to care. Of course it's just everything is their health, their welfare, their nutrition. it all ties in. And so it's easy to antagonize or to attack when you just go to the grocery store, and that you didn't have to spend 14 hours, making sure everyone is getting feed and water, and making sure that everything is running smooth, when everything's freezing, especially right now. We had something just to think about. We had a horrible storm run through here, and we're seeing -20s, -50s in the Dakotas, and the farmers were still getting up and taking care of their animals. Their animal welfare was first,
Yeah.
but all the rest of us were in like, oh, well, this is nice. It's nice and
Yeah.
cozy in here. So it's just important to think about that too.
Sitting behind our computers talking shit about you on Twitter, like, give me a break. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Well,
just ironic, you're a farmer out there, like making sure your cattle getting fed in like -30, and someone on Twitter is sitting there going, you don't care about animals.
totally, totally. That has been my experience through this entire world. Again, people really care a lot about animals in this world. And we hosted a former guest who was talking about grass fed, grass finished, and why that was so important. So he was a little bit more pro kind of grass fed, grass finished side of things. And we had somebody write us, and I really appreciate this person who wrote in that said, "Look, like some of the facts they were sharing are not all the way true. I personally, this person like worked in a feedlot system for a long time." And said the same kind of thing that you did, that we don't want our animals to be stressed. We're not just jacking them up with all kinds of
Yeah,
medications and all of these things that they don't need. We are taking care of our animals. We love our animals. The
yeah,
slaughter day is a tough day, just like it would be for anybody else, and they really care, and that gets lost in the nuance. And again, in some of these documentaries and things like Cowspiracy, or what you see in commercials, or whatever the media
yeah.
gets a hold of, you have such a different picture.
Yeah, I mean, they're the feedlots, and and packing houses, and the whole supply chain, like how you walk by a cattle, like, or a cow, like, I mean, there is so much that goes into it to make sure that you have the best handling to be low stress, because it's not good for the animal, it's not good for you, it's not good for anybody. So there's a lot that goes into, okay, even where you give a shot, it's something called beef quality assurance. It's actually my professor helped start in the 90s, was to make sure you gave the shot in the right place on the animal for animal welfare. And I would say the majority of the industry is following those guidelines. So they really care, producers, feeders, packers, and they want to do the right thing. And that's what they're doing, and that's what we're continuing to invest in science and research to keep understanding. For example, for animal welfare, there's so much that we still don't know. It's sustainability, there's so much that we don't know. So we'll just continue. It's a continuation. I think everyone just kind of sees it as an endpoint, animal welfare and sustainability, but it's going to be a continuous journey. It's just like human medicine, right? We don't want to go back 100, when someone says, I want food systems that we had 100 years ago. 100 years ago, like, we barely had, if not, I can't remember when they came about, but the FDA, if you want to go back to 1900, there was no FDA, there was no food safety. Formaldehyde was put into milk to make it not, when it would go rancid, to make sure it would have, wouldn't smell bad.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to go human medicine back 100 years, there was no antibiotics. So it's kind of that same thing. We're on a continuation, we're on a journey, and we'll just continue getting better and better. And a lot of people want to look back, see that as the scientifically or the right way to do things. I think we need to be on continued progression forward, learn from the past, but keep moving forward.
That is something a scientist would say. Science always advances. We never actually know. We're always just questioning and refining and questioning and refining and trying to get rid of that bad information. It's interesting you mentioned the issues that we were having with food delivery. The whole reason why Crisco got such a great start in 1911 is because the dairy industry in the 1900s was not in a very good place. Like, people were getting sick. All the lots of things were being done in cities, and part of the way they sold Crisco in the very beginning was to say, look at this clean white fat, we made this in a stainless steel vat. It can make your cookies crisp and make your cakes be really fluffy. And they sent out cookbooks to all the mothers in America, and it's like, why, in that context, why would you not choose the Crisco? And now we're understanding, like, that was probably not the best thing to do, but that was the option at the time.
But at the time it was safe,
Exactly.
for better or worse. So, it's just,
Exactly.
again, it's another trade-off.
Yeah. So, okay, going back to a conventional system, as there's the harvest of the animals. When I talked to the rancher, I asked him, what else are you doing with the rest of the cow? They produce beef. They don't do other things with other parts of the cow. And he kind of felt bad about it. He's like, you know what? We have to put the cow back into the earth after we've taken the beef from it. We currently don't have a use for the rest of the animal. And I told him, like, to me, that's not wasting. That is returning a life back into the planet, which is going to restore nutrients and keep that cycle going. But it also occurs to me that in a more conventional system, they're probably doing a pretty darn good job of using the entire cow. Is that right?
I love that you brought that up. Yeah, I think you saw my tweet the other day that says beef is so much more than just beef. And just talking of again, it's sustainability of scale. So if you're at a larger scale, you can do so much more. So what is so amazing about packing houses in the US is just tallow production. Tallow can be used for biofuel, and that's, fat that is not eaten, that's, rendered out. Bone meal, the hides for leather. It's like, all of the, the rugs and the car seats, all of those things. Let's see what else that we're producing. We're producing different types of grease that can be either edible or non-edible, things being put into makeup products. And so the list goes on and on and on about what you can do. And it's really cool to see all of the things that are happening at a plant. It's like beef or beef or chicken or pork, whatnot, any animal protein that you're doing, but it's so much more. And as far as sustainability, because otherwise, like you said, if you're not at that scale, it has to go to a landfill or rendering. It generally goes to a rendering facility. But this way, like, you can use the heart, all of the things that maybe we don't think of in the United States. So the intestines, menudo, all of those kind of internal organs, those can be utilized in other parts. There's also all the things you can do with these plants that are incredibly important from human health. So you always hear about porcine in beef valves for heart valves, things of that nature. Those are being done at the plant. They have people come in and they're taking out these valves. And so that's actually help people stay alive, which is like, what?
Wow.
So it's something that you just wouldn't even think about. So it's pretty cool, all the things that plants can do when you're at that larger scale, and you do need to be at a certain scale to make that feasible, to make that work.
Yeah, such a great point. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. This has been an amazing conversation. Did we miss anything? Is there something else that we missed that you would like to talk about? I know we could talk for hours and hours and hours about this. It's endlessly fascinating to me. But is there something important that we maybe skipped over in this conversation?
um I don't think so. I think if any of your friends or listeners are like, all right, now Sarah fully confused us, what do we buy? Buy what you're comfortable with. I don't really think there's a wrong answer for what you want to buy. Just buy what you want. It's consumer choice. If you want to buy grass-fed, buy grass-fed. If you want to buy grain-fed, buy grain-fed. And if you like one and think it tastes better, then I think what everyone should do is have a tasting test, and they get a whole bunch of different, maybe do the burger test, get a bunch of different ground beefs from different markets, and then decide which one you like best.
That sounds amazing. Is that a job? Can I be a burger connoisseur? I would do that.
I'm going to be self-appointed on that. I
Ah,
love.
damn. Damn.
Whenever I travel, I always have a burger, and I have to say I'm pretty partial to ours, but I'm always open to other ones.
That's awesome. Okay. Almost final question. What's the best burger you've ever had in your life?
Oh, I guess I can do a shout out, because it's like my upbringing. My favorite burger, I think it was really good, but it was just the atmosphere. It was the Roaring Fork. My mom and I would go for happy hour, and we get this beautiful half-pound medium rare burger. that I love to get in Scottsdale, Arizona, and then I would get a huckleberry margarita with it. And that was like my favorite thing in Arizona was always getting one of those burgers. So
That's amazing. Yeah, great question. That's amazing. You have great answer. Excuse me. There's a great show out there. I don't even know where it is, but it's called Worth It. And these three guys go around and eat an inexpensive version of a food, a moderately expensive version of a food, and then like a way over the top, like a $7,000 burger at a place in Vegas or something that has like gold flecks and like truffles on
yeah.
it, whatever.
Oh
And so
yeah,
they
I've heard of those things.
yeah,
No,
they eat them all and then they go back and say like which one was our favorite for the price. And I always look at like the dive bars and like the really cheap ones always look the best to me. Like they have the
yeah.
best food.
But what I always try to get if I can, this is my California coming out, but I was recently diagnosed with celiac and which sucks. But my favorite burger is besides that one from my upbringing is I get the double protein wrapped from
Yeah.
In-N-Out, and I think they do that the best. So and they grind their own chuck, which is pretty cool. And so a chuck is a really flavorful cut, and so I do enjoy their burgers quite a bit, and I can eat them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good call. No, it's funny. I toured an In-N-Out facility that opened near me maybe like 10 years ago. And touring their kitchen is amazing. They do a great job with their food and everything's really fresh and in-house. They don't have freezers. So that's a good choice. We'll plug
Yeah.
In-N-Out as well. That's
Hey,
great.
shout out to In-N-Out. Maybe give me a tour.
Exactly. That's the California in you for sure. That's awesome. Dr. Sarah Klopatek, this again has been such an amazing conversation. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
I do have a LinkedIn. I've started Twitter. It's handle is kind of a joke. It's at Dr. Beef Babe, Dr. Beef Babe. And so I post science, and also if you have any questions, I can always tweet the answers. For any subjects, I also work in pork and poultry as well. So any kind of sustainability, environmental questions in that field as well. So
That's amazing. Awesome. We will link to that in the show notes. I hope you have thick skin for Twitter. I'm sure it was a bit of a surprise when you first got it and first started getting some hate. You might get a little bit more, but
I
your
don't
work
know.
is
Honestly, this sounds so weird. It's been one of the most positive experiences. I'm meeting so many amazing scientists, and scientists that they're very much against eating beef, but it's great. They're open, they're talking, they want to learn. People, to be connecting to ranchers, to be connected to you. So and also this is going to sound ridiculous. They post so many papers that it's like I don't even have to do a lit review. I just have to just follow my Twitter. I'm like, oh, that's a good paper to read. Oh, okay. So it's a straight up nerd Twitter.
I love it. I love it. No, I'm glad that you've had that experience. And you're right. That was the way that you and I connected. And I just love how you approach this topic. It is very nuanced and very complicated. And you don't shy away from that. And you share that message with everybody. And I'm glad that people are treating well. So Sarah Klopatek, thank you so very much for coming on our show today to share your message. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Casey. It's great being here.
Awesome. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.